She didn't cry when they accused her. She just looked at her hands. That's what I remember most. Not the lawyer in the expensive suit, not the family sitting on the other side of the courtroom, polished and certain and dressed like they'd already won. What I remember is a woman named Rosa looking down at her own hands, the hands that had cleaned that family's home for 6 years, and staying completely still. No tears, no outburst, just quiet. And in that quiet, I heard everything. If you believe that honest work deserves honest treatment, subscribe right now. Every week I bring you stories from inside the courtroom. Real cases, real people, real consequences. The kind of stories that remind you why truth still matters. Subscribe, and let's begin. The Whitfield family arrived first, as wealthy families often do. Early, prepared, positioned. There were 3 of them. The mother, Diane Whitfield, 61 years old, in a cream blazer and heels that clicked against the floor like a metronome. Her son, Preston, 32, who had the kind of face that had never been told no for long enough to believe no was a real word. And their attorney, a man named Gerald Foss, who carried himself with the weary confidence of someone paid very well to make problems disappear. They were suing Rosa Mendez, 64 years old, for the theft of a sapphire pendant necklace valued at $22,000. They claimed she had taken it during a regular cleaning visit. They claimed she was the only person with access to the upstairs bedroom where it had been kept. They claimed they had been generous, trusting, even affectionate toward Rosa over the years, and that her betrayal was not just criminal, but personal. Rosa arrived alone. No attorney, no family member beside her. She carried a canvas shopping bag that held her documents, a water bottle, and a small zippered pouch where she kept her rosary. She sat down at her table, folded her hands, and waited. She was wearing her good blouse, the blue one she saved for church and court appearances, of which this was her first. I looked at both tables before I said a single word. I've done this long enough to read a room before it speaks. And what I read that morning was this. On one side, a family performing confidence. On the other, a woman simply present, honest, undefended except by the truth she was carrying. I called the room to order. "Miss Whitfield," I said, "tell me what happened." Diane folded her hands on the table and drew a slow breath, the kind that says, "I have rehearsed this, and I would like you to notice how composed I am." "Your Honor," she began, "Rosa has worked in our home since 2017. We paid her fairly. We were kind to her. We bought her gifts at Christmas. When her daughter was ill a few years ago, I personally gave her 2 weeks off with full pay." She paused to let that land. "I say this not to boast, but to show you the level of trust we extended. And after 6 years of that trust, my sapphire pendant, a piece that belonged to my mother, a piece of genuine sentimental value, disappeared the morning after Rosa's last cleaning visit." She looked at Rosa when she said it. Not with anger, something colder than anger. The look of someone who has already decided. "I didn't take it," Rosa said. Her voice was soft but steady, accented but clear. She did not look at Diane when she said it. She looked at me. "I have never taken anything from that house. Not one thing. Not in 6 years." "Ms. Mendez," I said, "tell me about your last visit." Rosa straightened slightly. "I went on a Wednesday, same as always. I cleaned the kitchen, the 2 bathrooms, the living room, and the upstairs guest room. I did not clean the master bedroom that day because Mrs. Whitfield's sister was visiting and the door was closed. I knocked. No one answered. So I left it and moved on." I turned to Diane. "Was your sister visiting that week?" Diane's composure shifted slightly, barely, but I saw it. "She was there briefly, yes, but she wouldn't have gone into my room." "Did you ask her?" She knows that room is private." "That's not what I asked," I said. A small silence opened up. Gerald Foss moved to fill it. "Your Honor, the point is that Ms. Mendez was in the house that day. She is the only staff member with a key. The pendant was there before she arrived and gone the next morning. And the sister, I asked? She left that same evening. Before the pendant was discovered missing? The pendant was discovered the following morning, yes, but... So you cannot actually confirm it was there when your client's sister left. Gerald Foss smiled the smile of a man recalibrating. We believe the timeline clearly indicates. I'll decide what the timeline indicates, I said. Let's keep going. Preston Whitfield had said almost nothing since the hearing began. He sat with his ankle crossed over his knee, scrolling something on his phone under the table where he thought I couldn't see it. He looked up occasionally with the expression of someone waiting for a meeting to end. I had been watching him. There is a particular kind of entitlement that is most visible in its boredom. A man who is genuinely worried about the outcome of a case does not look bored. Preston looked bored. He looked like a man who already knew what was going to happen and was mildly irritated it was taking this long. That bothered me more than anything Diane had said. "Mr. Whitfield," I said. He looked up, adjusted his posture quickly. "Yes, Your Honor." "When did you last see the pendant?" He thought for a moment. "I don't really go into my mother's room." "That's not what I asked." "I saw it maybe a week before. She was wearing it at dinner." "And you have no idea how it went missing?" "No," he said, simply, flatly. I nodded once, wrote something down. Let the silence sit just long enough to be uncomfortable. "Ms. Mendez," I said, "has anything like this ever happened before? Any accusation of theft at this home or any other?" "No, Your Honor, never. I have references from 4 families. I have them here." She reached into her canvas bag and produced a small stack of folded letters. She held them out toward my clerk. "They go back 12 years. I took a moment to look at them. 4 letters, handwritten or printed, each one a brief, sincere account of Rose's work and character. One of them, from a family she had worked for since 2011, said simply, "Rosa Mendez is the most trustworthy person who has ever worked in our home. We would hire her again without a second thought." I set the letters down. "Mr. Foss," I said, "what evidence do you have beyond proximity? What do you have that places the pendant in Ms. Mendez's possession?" He opened his folder. "We have a receipt showing the pendant was purchased and insured. We have photographs of Mrs. Whitfield wearing it on several occasions. And we have a statement from the insurance company." "You filed an insurance claim?" I interrupted. "We intend to, yes." "Have you filed it yet?" A pause. "We are in the process." I set down my pen. "You are suing Ms. Mendez for $22,000 and simultaneously preparing to file an insurance claim for the same item." The room went quiet. Gerald Foss straightened his tie. "That's a standard procedure when property is—" "It's a standard procedure," I said, "when the property is genuinely missing. But you cannot collect insurance on stolen property and also collect a civil judgment from the person you accused of stealing it. That would be collecting twice. You understand that?" Foss nodded carefully. "Of course." "Then explain to me which one you actually want, because right now it looks like you want both." Diane's jaw tightened. Preston's phone disappeared entirely into his jacket pocket. I called a brief recess before the evidence review. I needed 10 minutes to read something my clerk had brought me before the hearing resumed. It was a report from the Gemological Certification Database. Not something most people know exists, but when a piece of jewelry is insured at a high value, it is typically registered with a certificate of authenticity that includes a serial number, a photograph, and detailed notes about the stone and setting. The Whitfield pendant had been registered. My clerk had requested the record as routine due diligence. What I read in those 10 minutes is what changed this case entirely. When I returned to the bench, I was ready. "Ms. Whitfield," I said, "your pendant was insured by the Whitfield household policy under a floater endorsement. Is that correct?" "Yes," Diane said, still composed. "And when was that insurance endorsement added?" She glanced at her attorney. He gave a small, almost invisible nod. "A few years ago. I don't recall the exact date." I opened the report in front of me. The endorsement was added 11 days ago. The courtroom went very still. 11 days, I repeated, not a few years. 11 days before the pendant allegedly went missing. Diane's hand, resting on the table, pressed flat. Her knuckles went slightly white. That can't be right. It can be verified, I said, and it has been. By the insurance company's own records, which my clerk requested this morning. I set the document down. Ms. Whitfield, why would you add an insurance endorsement for a pendant you'd owned for years, just 11 days before reporting it stolen? Silence. Had something changed recently? Was there some reason you were thinking about that necklace more than usual? Diane opened her mouth, closed it. Her composure, which had held through everything, was beginning to show its seams. Gerald Foss leaned in and whispered something. She shook her head slightly. Your Honor, he said, my client may have simply been updating her home inventory, which is a prudent 11 days before filing a theft report, I said. The timing is suspicious, I finished. The timing is suspicious, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. The insurance company flagged it too. That's in the same report. The murmur in the courtroom was low but unmistakable. Rosa sat absolutely still. Her hands had not moved. She was watching me the way a person watches the only thing standing between them and a long fall. I looked at Preston. His boredom was gone now, entirely gone. He was watching his mother with an expression I had not seen on his face all morning. It was not fear exactly. It was the look of someone recalculating whether they had understood the situation correctly. Mr. Whitfield, I said, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is there any possibility the pendant was not stolen? Is there any possibility it was misplaced, moved, or removed from the house by someone other than Ms. Mendez? He said nothing for 4 full seconds. I counted. Then quietly he said, I don't know. Diane turned to him sharply. Preston. I said, I don't know, he repeated, louder this time, and something in his voice had changed. The flatness was gone. What replaced it was something I recognized. It was the sound of a person deciding whether to keep going or stop. He stopped. Your Honor, he said, looking at me directly for the first time all morning. I think I need to say something. Gerald Foss put a hand on his arm. Preston looked at it, then looked away. I moved the necklace, he said, 2 weeks ago. I took it to a jeweler to have it appraised because I was thinking about I had some financial things I was sorting through. I brought it back the same day. I put it in the drawer of my mother's vanity, the small one on the left. He exhaled. I didn't tell her because I didn't want to explain why I'd been looking at her jewelry. The room held its breath. Diane Whitfield turned to her son with an expression I will not describe in detail because it belongs to the private grief of a mother, understanding something she didn't want to understand. Preston did not look at her. He looked at Rosa, and in a voice that had gone very quiet, he said, I'm sorry. I should have said something right away. I didn't know you'd already told her it was gone. Rosa's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together. She nodded once, very slightly, the way people do when they are too full of emotion to speak and too dignified to fall apart. I have presided over cases involving fraud, violence, broken families, and broken promises. But I will tell you honestly that some of the most damaging cases I have ever seen are the quiet ones. The ones that don't involve weapons or dramatic confrontations. The ones that involve one person with power deciding that another person with none is expendable. Accusing Rosa of theft was not a moment of rage. It was a decision. Diane Whitfield looked at her son's confession of carelessness, looked at the disruption it would cause to her household and her sense of order, and decided it was easier to point at the woman who cleaned the floors. She may not have thought of it in those terms. People rarely do. But that is what it was. Rosa had worked in that home for 6 years. She had shown up on time, done her work without complaint, never once given them reason to doubt her. And in the moment when doubt was convenient, it took Diane Whitfield about 12 hours to decide Rosa was a thief. That is the thing about trust when it only flows in one direction. It isn't really trust, it's assumption. The assumption that the person with less power will absorb the cost when something goes wrong, that they won't fight back, that they won't have 4 letters of reference in a canvas bag, that they won't sit quietly in a courtroom with their hands folded, telling the truth, and wait for it to matter. Rosa waited, and it mattered. I ruled in favor of the defendant. I awarded Rosa Mendez full reimbursement of the wages she had lost since being dismissed from her position following the accusation, a period of 9 weeks. I awarded additional damages for defamation because Diane Whitfield had told 2 other households in her neighborhood that Rosa had stolen from her, costing Rosa 2 potential clients. The total came to just over $8,000. I also referred the insurance matter to the carrier's investigation unit, noting the timeline discrepancy in the endorsement and the subsequent claim process. That referral was separate from my ruling. It was simply the right thing to do. Before I closed, I said one more thing. I said it looking at Diane Whitfield, but I meant it for everyone in that room. You hired this woman. You let her into your home for 6 years. You trusted her with your keys, your private spaces, your belongings. And the moment something went wrong, something your own son caused, you pointed at her without a second thought. Not because the evidence said she did it, because she was there, because she was available, because it was easy. Diane said nothing. Convenience is not the same as truth, and position is not the same as credibility. In this courtroom, I don't care how much your jewelry is worth. I care whether what you're telling me is honest. And today, the most honest person in this room was the one with the least to gain and everything to lose. The gavel came down. I heard later that Rosa went back to work the following Monday. Not for the Whitfields, of course, for one of the families who had written her a reference letter. They had heard what happened and called her before the week was out. She started a few days after the verdict. The family had 2 young children who apparently greeted her at the door by name and asked if she wanted to see the drawing they'd made her. She told a friend it was the best Monday she'd had in 2 months. Preston Whitfield, I was told by someone familiar with the matter, quietly sought treatment for a gambling problem that had apparently been building for some time, the root of his financial calculations around his mother's jewelry. I mention this not to excuse what he caused, but because I think it matters. Behind most acts of cowardice, there is a person in pain who chose the wrong way to manage it. That doesn't make it right. It makes it human. And human mistakes, even damaging ones, can sometimes become the beginning of something better if the person is willing to face them. Diane Whitfield issued a written apology to Rosa through her attorney about 3 weeks after the verdict. It was formal. It was brief. Rosa accepted it the same way she had absorbed everything else in this whole ordeal. Quietly, without spectacle, with more grace than she was owed. There is something I want to leave you with today, something I believe in deeply after a lifetime in this work. Dignity is not something you receive from other people. It is something you carry. You can carry it when you have nothing else. You can carry it into a courtroom with no lawyer, no money, and no certainty of the outcome. You can carry it in a blue church blouse and a canvas bag full of letters. You can carry it while someone across the room is saying the worst things about you in the most composed voice you've ever heard. Rosa carried hers the entire time. She never stopped, and when the truth finally caught up to what she already knew, she didn't triumph loudly. She just exhaled and went back to work. That is what real strength looks like. Not the kind with a lawyer and a pearl necklace and a rehearsed opening statement. The kind that doesn't need any of that. The kind that simply tells the truth and trusts that somewhere, eventually, someone is paying close enough attention to hear it. I try to be that person. Every day I sit on that bench, I try to be that person. If Rosa's story stayed with you today, leave a comment below and write just 2 words, still standing. For every honest worker who has ever been doubted by the people they served. For everyone who kept carrying the truth, even when it was heavy. Still standing. Thank you for being here today. Take good care.